The rucksack hit the ground with a sound that echoed across the assembly area. 136 kilograms. 300 pounds. Full combat load. The male soldiers looked at her and laughed. "You can't lift that," one said. "Your skinny arms can't carry this," another added. The woman looked at the pack. Then she looked at them. Her face showed nothing, but her muscles held something. Memory. Because those hands had carried this before. That back had felt this weight before. Those legs had walked this brutal terrain before. Nobody asked. Nobody wondered. But very soon, everyone would learn. That week, woman had completed Ranger School's toughest courses, served in 3 mountain operations, and finished 50-kilometer marches. And today, they would all watch. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these powerful tales of strength and courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Her name was Sergeant First Class Kira Dalton, though at Forward Operating Base Ridgeline. Most people called her the Small One, or the Admin Transfer, or sometimes, when they thought she couldn't hear, the Girl Who Won't Last. She stood 5'3" in boots, weighed maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, had shoulders that looked narrow under her uniform and arms that seemed too thin for combat gear. To every soldier who judged by appearance, she looked like someone who belonged behind a desk, not in the field. But here's what nobody knew. Kira Dalton wasn't an admin transfer. She was Ranger qualified, airborne certified, mountain warfare trained. She'd spent 4 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment before transferring to this base for personal reasons involving her aging father, who lived 2 hours away. Her file was thick with commendations, including an Army Commendation Medal with Valor for actions during a firefight in the Kira province. But the file sat in the S1 office, unread by most of the soldiers who now stood judging her by her size. The company had gathered at 0600 hours for the quarterly combat fitness assessment. This wasn't the standard PT test with push-ups and running. This was the brutal one. The test designed to separate those who could carry the weight of war from those who couldn't. Full combat load carry over 12 kilometers of mountain terrain. Obstacles included. Time limit strict. Failure meant reassignment. Success meant respect. Staff Sergeant Marcus Trent, a 6'2" former college linebacker who'd made the Army his career after football didn't work out, stood near the equipment staging area with his usual crew. He saw Kira approaching and nudged his buddy, Specialist Cole Reeves. "Check it out," Trent muttered. "She's actually gonna try." Reeves grinned. "No way she makes it past the first hill." Around them, other soldiers noticed. Conversations paused. Attention shifted. It wasn't hostile, necessarily. Just curious. Skeptical. The way people look when they're about to watch something they assume will fail. Private First Class Elias Grant, younger than most, felt uncomfortable with the atmosphere, but said nothing. He'd learned in his short time here that questioning the group wasn't wise. Captain Morris, the company commander overseeing the assessment, stood on a small platform with a megaphone. "Listen up." His voice cut through the morning air. "Today's assessment is non-negotiable. Full combat load means full combat load. Rucksack, weapon, plates, ammunition, water. No exceptions. The course is 12 kilometers through the Ridge Trail. You know the terrain. It's not friendly. Time limit is 3 hours. Anyone who can't handle it needs to speak now." Silence. Nobody stepped forward. Pride wouldn't allow it. Trent glanced at Kira again. She stood quietly near the back, checking her boots, adjusting her gloves. She looked calm. Too calm. It irritated him. The rucksacks were distributed. Each soldier loaded theirs according to the standard manifest. Trent hoisted his easily, the weight familiar across his broad shoulders. Reeves grunted slightly, but managed. Down the line, soldiers of various sizes adjusted straps, tested weight distribution, psyched themselves up. Then the equipment NCO, Sergeant First Class Hammond, approached Kira with her assigned pack. "Ma'am," he said quietly, using a term of respect though she wasn't an officer. "This is regulation weight. If you need." Kira shook her head. "I'm good, Sergeant." Hammond hesitated, then set the pack on the ground in front of her. The thud was heavy. Final. Kira knelt beside it, checked the straps, tested the frame. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, the kind that comes from doing something 1,000 times. But nobody watching recognized that efficiency. They only saw small hands on a big pack. But wait, let's pause here for a moment. Because what happened next wasn't just about physical strength. It was about assumption. About the stories we tell ourselves when we look at someone and decide what they can or cannot do. Trent saw a small woman and assumed weakness. Reeves saw thin arms and assumed inability. Even Captain Morris, watching from his platform, felt a flicker of concern that this soldier might hurt herself trying to prove something. But none of them asked the most important question. What has she already proven? Kira stood, turned her back to the rucksack, and crouched. She threaded her arms through the straps, adjusted the hip belt, and stood up in one smooth motion. The weight settled across her shoulders and hips exactly where it needed to be. Her posture didn't buckle. Her knees didn't shake. She simply stood there, adjusted her weapon sling, and waited for the starting signal. Trent blinked. He'd expected struggle, expected her to need help. But she looked ready. Captain Morris raised his arm. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, move. The mass of soldiers surged forward, boots hitting dirt, gear clanking, breath already coming hard despite the march barely beginning. The first kilometer was flat, a warm-up before the real pain. Trent and his crew pushed to the front, their long strides eating ground. Kira stayed in the middle of the pack, maintaining a steady pace. Not rushing, not falling behind, just moving. The first hill appeared at kilometer 2, a steep incline that turned legs to lead and lungs to fire. This is where the assessment truly began. Soldiers slowed, some stopped to adjust straps, others gulped water. Trent attacked the hill with aggressive determination, wanting to set a pace that showed dominance. Reeves followed, struggling slightly, but keeping up through sheer will. Behind them, the formation began to stretch, gaps appearing between the strong and the struggling. Kira hit the hill without changing her breathing pattern. She'd learned in Ranger school that hills weren't enemies, they were rhythms. You didn't fight them, you joined them. Her steps shortened, but her pace held steady. One foot in front of the other. Eyes on the ground 3 feet ahead. Mind quiet. Body doing what it had been trained to do for years. Here's something most people don't understand about carrying heavy weight over long distances. It's not about muscle alone. It's about skeletal alignment, about core stability, about breathing technique and mental endurance. Big muscles help, sure, but efficiency beats size every time. Kira's body had been forged in training environments where inefficiency meant failure and failure meant starting over. She'd learned to carry weight the way pack mules carry weight, distributed, balanced, sustainable. At kilometer 4, Trent looked back and was surprised to see Kira still in the middle of the pack. He'd expected her to be far. Instead, she was there, moving with a mechanical consistency that looked almost effortless. It bothered him. It wasn't supposed to look easy, not for someone her size. The second major hill arrived at kilometer 6, steeper than the first, longer, crueler. This is where soldiers started making deals with themselves. Just make it to that tree. Just make it to that rock. Just make it to somewhere that isn't here. Trent's breathing was ragged now. His legs burned. The weight that felt manageable at the start now felt like it was crushing his spine. Reeves had fallen back, his face red, jaw clenched against the pain. Kira climbed. Her breathing was controlled, rhythmic. In through the nose for 4 steps, out through the mouth for 4 steps. The technique kept her calm, kept her oxygenated, kept her moving when others stalled. Around her, soldiers began to crack. One stopped completely, hands on knees, waving off the medical observer. Another sat down, pack still on, head hanging. The weight was winning. But hold on, because this is where the story shifts, where the underestimated become undeniable, where the assumptions start to crack like ice under pressure. Trent reached the top of the hill, chest heaving, and turned to see who else had made it. Reeves staggered up a minute later. Then Grant. Then 2 others. And then Kira, walking steady, face calm, like she'd just finished a casual hike instead of a brutal climb with a crushing load. Trent stared. How? She was half his size. She should be destroyed. But there she was, checking her water, adjusting her straps, ready to keep moving. For the first time, doubt crept into his certainty. Maybe she wasn't just lucky. Maybe no. He pushed the thought away. The course wasn't done yet. Kilometer 8 brought the obstacle section. A creek crossing with no bridge, just slippery rocks and cold water. A low crawl under barbed wire. A wall climb with full gear. This is where size sometimes mattered, where reach and strength could make the difference between smooth and struggling. Trent approached the creek, picked his path carefully, and hopped across. His long legs made it manageable. Reeves nearly slipped, but recovered. Kira reached the creek and paused for only a second. Then she moved. Not hopping, not leaping, just stepping deliberately from rock to rock, her center of gravity low, her movements controlled. She crossed without incident. At the wire crawl, she dropped flat and moved like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Because she had. At the wall, she used momentum and technique rather than brute strength, swinging herself up and over in a motion that looked practiced, efficient, professional. What would you have thought if you were watching? Would you still be assuming? Or would you start to wonder? Would you start to ask yourself what you didn't know about this person moving through obstacles like they were old friends instead of enemies? Kilometer 10. The third hill. The worst one. The one nicknamed the Breaker because it broke spirits more than bodies. Trent hit it and felt his legs protest. His pace slowed. His breath came in gasps. The weight on his back felt like it had doubled. Reeves was far behind now, barely visible. Other soldiers had spread out over half a kilometer, each one suffering privately in their own battle against gravity and exhaustion. Kira approached the Breaker and did something nobody expected. She passed Trent, not sprinting, not showing off, just moving at her steady, mechanical pace while his faltered. Trent watched her go, too exhausted to even feel angry, just confused, defeated. How was she still moving like that? His mind couldn't process it. The story he'd told himself at the start, small equals weak, was collapsing under the weight of reality. At the top of the Breaker, Captain Morris stood watching with binoculars, tracking his soldiers' progress. He saw Trent struggling near the middle of the hill, saw Reeves even further back, saw several soldiers who'd given up entirely, sitting with medical observers. And then he saw something that made him lower his binoculars and stare. A small figure moving up the hill with the kind of steady rhythm that indicated not just strength, but experience. Not just effort, but mastery. Who was that? Morris asked the NCO beside him. The NCO checked his roster. Sergeant First Class Dalton, sir. Recent transfer from. He paused, reading more carefully. Holy hell, sir. She's Ranger qualified. 75th Regiment. Mountain Phase Honor Grad. Morris's eyebrows rose. Why wasn't I told? The NCO shrugged uncomfortably. Fall just came through last week, sir. Guess it didn't make the rounds. Morris watched Kira crest the hill and keep moving without pause. A smile tugged at his mouth. He'd served long enough to recognize real capability when he saw it. And what he was seeing was someone who'd already proven everything these soldiers were struggling to prove for the first time. The final 2 kilometers were downhill, which sounds easier but isn't. Downhill with heavy weight destroys knees and tests balance. Soldiers who'd pushed too hard uphill now paid the price going down, their legs shaking, their steps uncertain. Kira descended with controlled precision, letting gravity assist without letting it take over. Her training had included technical descents with full gear. This was painful, but it was familiar pain. She crossed the finish line at 2 hours and 12 minutes, well under the 3-hour limit. She shrugged off her pack, set it down carefully, and drank water while waiting for others to finish. Captain Morris approached. Sergeant Dalton, he said formally. She straightened. Sir. He studied her for a moment. That was impressive. How are you feeling? Good to go, sir, she replied simply. He nodded. I read your file. Should have read it sooner. My mistake. Kira didn't smile. Didn't gloat, just nodded. No problem, sir. Over the next 30 minutes, soldiers trickled across the finish line. Trent came in at 2 hours 41 minutes, face red, legs wobbling. Reeves at 2 hours 53, barely under the limit. Others came later. Some didn't come at all, having dropped out along the way. As Trent collapsed onto the ground, he saw Kira standing calmly nearby, looking like she could do the whole thing again if asked. How? Trent finally asked, too exhausted to hide his confusion. Kira glanced at him. How what? How did you? He gestured vaguely at the course, at her, at the impossibility of what he'd just witnessed. She considered the question, then said simply, training, experience, and not listening when people say I can't. Trent let his head fall back, staring at the sky. He'd learned something today, something that would stick with him for the rest of his career. Size doesn't predict capability. Assumptions are dangerous. And the person you underestimate might be the person who's already done everything you're afraid to try. Later that evening, Captain Morris called a formation. I want to address something, he began. Today, many of you completed a difficult assessment. You should be proud. But I also want you to learn from today. Some of you made assumptions about a fellow soldier based on appearance. Those assumptions were wrong. He paused, letting it sink in. Sergeant First Class Dalton is Ranger qualified. She served in combat zones. She's earned respect through action, not appearance. I expect all of you to remember that. The formation was silent. Trent felt the weight of the words. Not the crushing weight of the rucksack, but the heavier weight of being wrong. Of having to reassess everything he thought he knew. It was uncomfortable, but necessary. After dismissal, he approached Kira. Hey, he said awkwardly. She looked up from checking her gear. Yeah. I owe you an apology, Trent said. I judged you before I knew you. That was wrong. Kira studied him for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. Just remember it next time. There won't be a next time, Trent promised. She smiled slightly. Good. Because the next person you underestimate might not be as patient as me. And that's the real lesson here, isn't it? It's not just about one soldier proving herself. It's about all of us learning to question our assumptions. To look beyond size, gender, appearance, and ask what someone has actually done. What they've actually proven. Because strength comes in forms we don't always recognize. Capability doesn't always look the way we expect. And sometimes, the person carrying the heaviest load is the one who looks least likely to carry it at all. So what's the moral? Maybe it's this. Don't judge someone's capacity by their appearance. Don't assume weakness where there might be hidden strength. And if someone tells you they can do something, maybe, just maybe, they've already done it 100 times before while you were busy doubting them. Kira Dalton didn't need to prove anything to herself. She'd already proven it in mountains and deserts and places most soldiers will never see. But she proved it again that day. Not for herself. For everyone who'd ever been underestimated. For everyone who'd ever been told they were too small, too weak, too different to succeed. And at the end of that brutal 12-kilometer march, when the weight had been carried and the assumptions had been shattered, one truth remained. The person who looks weakest might actually be the strongest person in the room. You just have to be wise enough to look beyond the surface and see what's really there. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran tales that honor the strength, determination, and quiet power of those who serve beyond expectations. And before you go, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And have you ever surprised someone who underestimated you?